Welcome to Crossroad Connection. We're speaking out for those left unheard. My name is David Schuringer. I'm the host of your program, and I'm the president of Crossroad Bible Institute. And we have in the studio with us today a very special guest. Her name is Heather Garretson. Heather, welcome to Crossroad Connection.
Thank you for having me.
You are a scholar in residence at City University of New York Law School. And according to the research that was done for me, you were a former prosecutor and a former defense attorney and a professor of law at the Cooley Law School. Is all that true?
All of it.
What did you like better, being a prosecutor or a defender?
Well, you win a lot more when you're a prosecutor.
Yeah, I got more power.
Yeah. Since about 98% of the cases end in convictions, you do actually get what you set out for. But being a prosecutor was an incredibly valuable experience. I was with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Kansas City, Missouri. I actually ended up in Kansas City because I had a clerkship there. And my husband and I met in D.C. We thought we would go to Kansas City, do my clerkship, and go back. But we ended up being really blessed in Kansas City. We had a great network of friends, some really great professional opportunities. And so I was in the narcotics unit in the prosecutor's office there.
Wow. And give us a quick rundown of your defense lawyer experience.
So I was actually in private practice for a little bit at Bryan Cave, which is an international law firm. And when I was there, I met some gentlemen who eventually broke off and they did their own firm. And they did only boutique litigation. So when I left the U.S. Attorney's Office, I went with their firm, Berkowitz Oliver, and we did white-collar criminal defense work.
Okay. Well, that whole area of public defense is very important to us because as a commissioner on the Indigent Defense Commission here in Michigan, so it's interesting to hear from someone who's been on both sides of it. But your specialties, and you're in town doing some special speaking on that this weekend. But your specialties are in mass incarceration and collateral consequences.
That's right.
Well, we are interested in that too. We have, like this year, 46,000 students in all the facilities around the country and in 27 countries and stuff. So, but it's the United States that has this thing of mass incarceration. What does that mean?
That's right. So the United States has 5% of the world's population and 25% of its inmates. Mm-hmm. So we have gone from the 1960s, which was truly a time of social upheaval.
We were all scared. I was a kid.
Well, and there was a lot of crime. I mean, the crime was on the increase.
Cities were on fire.
Right. So what happened was a very punitive response. And so politically, there has been an increase across the board in number of arrests that lead to incarceration. That incarceration is longer than it's ever been. So what has happened as we now have 2.3 million people who are incarcerated.
And people should know, like in 1970, I think that was 500,000.
So we've had this massive influx into our penal institutions with this very punitive policy, which has done a couple things. I mean, it's really changed the structure of our communities, but it has also taken funds away from alternatives to incarceration and to things. So mandatory minimums, which now people are incarcerated for minor offenses when they used to have other ways to deal with that.
Right.
And it costs a lot of money. But it also costs a lot of human capital, and the collateral consequences of a conviction last a lifetime.
Right. Yeah. Well, we're gonna come back to that collateral consequences in a moment, but more on this mass incarceration thing. I know that the figure is used of 2.3 million, but I've been doing a lot of research on this, and maybe you can confirm this or not. But what I have found is that does not include the 350,000 juveniles we have in detention centers, and neither does it cover the undocumented immigrants, so that the people we have incarcerated is probably closer to 3 million.
That's probably right.
The 2.3 million is really a gross underestimation of what is really going out there and who we are putting away.
Right.
Now, mass incarceration, you mentioned about mandatory sentencing and so forth. My sense is, and now you have been a prosecutor and a defense lawyer.
That's right.
that mandatory sentencing, which has escalated mass incarceration, 3 strikes and you're outlaws, and all this kind of stuff, strikes me as a gross perversion of justice because it ties the hands of the judge to exercise justice in that unique situation. Is that an exaggeration?
Well, that's so interesting. There's a great report out that's the growth in mass incarceration, explanation and consequences. It's done, I think, by the National Institute of Science. They just came out with this amazing report. They found that mandatory minimums, because they do exactly what you say, they tie the hands of people in the system, people just try and work around them. So people will be charged with different crimes so that they can, in their own environment, try and get a more just outcome because of what you're saying.
Because they can sense it's not right,
Right.
so they're finding a way around it
Right.
if they can.
Right. So the policy has changed from what is best for this person, this crime in this community, to everybody gets the same thing. And to be fair, the motives behind that were pure. You know, they didn't want people committing the same crime in Grand Rapids that committed it in Detroit, that committed it in the Sioux, to all have different sentences based on just their location. But what has happened is you're still getting a different sentence.
Well, the fact is that there really is no identical crime. Everyone has its own context, its own person, its own motives. I mean, there is no such thing as identical crimes, it strikes me.
That's probably true. And I think that judges, I clerked for some judges, you know, good judges know that their job is to look at the individuals, and that should be relevant in their sentencing decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, why do you need judges? You know, you can
Right.
just have computers do it or something like that.
Right.
I mean, justice cannot prevail unless you have a person there to weigh the circumstances and to weigh the context and then to render a verdict. There should be nothing automatic about that. You mentioned about us being punitive, our mass incarceration. I think I prefer the word retributive, because punitive punishment can be restorative in a positive way, or punishment can be retributive and vengeful. Has mass incarceration made us a more vengeful country, or did a vengeful country produce mass incarceration?
Well, when I say punitive, I think I use it more not just for the punishment for the crime, as much as our system punishes in perpetuity. There is no such thing anymore in the United States as doing a crime and doing your time
And being done with it.
and being done with it.
Ah.
So,
It's like being in purgatory.
right. So the idea that, and I believe
That's
when
helpful.
I was a prosecutor, that there is an appropriate place for order and for paying your debt to society and for incarceration when that is the, as you said, the appropriate response. Also, as a defense attorney, I believe in the Constitution, and I believe in justice, and I believe in a right to counsel. But I think that crime it's a communal problem that we no longer are able to say, you did this, you hurt our community, here's your punishment, and now you're done. We now, because of collateral consequences, punish forever. If you have a felony in Michigan, I think actually if you have a misdemeanor, you can't be a notary public. You can't work at a sheriff's office. You have a check kiting charge from when you're 20, you can't be a 911 dispatcher. Ever,
right.
So it's this whole idea that no matter what you do, this constantly hangs over your head and is a punishment. That does not encourage people to productively become members of society again.
Well, that's absolutely right. And we have been involved quite a bit with the Democracy Restoration Act, with the Brennan Center for Justice, where I'm on the advisory board for the communities of faith, and have spoken on Capitol Hill about that. There's an example, right, of collateral damage where they did the time, they paid their debt to society, but we continue to punish them. You know, And then we do that in other ways too, don't we? And we'll talk more about that maybe after the break. I mean, we will for sure, but we can get started in that right now. We have this box on employment applications and so forth. So, what's with this continuing to punish people who have been punished?
Well, I think that if you look at sort of how all of this developed, it probably was out of a place where it was appropriate to say, if you have been convicted of bank robbery, you can't be a bank teller. Like, that's fair, right?
Okay.
Or you at least can't be a bank teller this year, right?
Okay.
So, but that has blossomed into collateral consequences that just are completely out of control and have nothing to do with the crime that you committed, how severe it was, or how long ago it was. So a more appropriate response is to look at someone's history, to look at them as a person as opposed to a criminal, and to say, this is something you did, here's how long ago it was. Examine whether it has anything to do with whatever you're applying for now, whether that is a school loan or an apartment or public benefits or a job, and to examine that person independent of their record.
In our state here in Michigan, I think it was about a year ago, Governor Snyder signed into law, and I wonder how common this is, but I was very pleased with it, that after 8 years, if a person has not recidivated, their record gets expunged. Now, I happen to know that from psychology, they say that if a person does not commit a crime for 7 years, they're no more likely to commit a crime than you and me. So he must have gave it one more good measure.
Right. So the research does show that if there is no new crime between 7 and 10 years, that a previous offender is no more likely to offend.
Right. And so
than
he
a general member.
he got that. Is that common? That places get that their record would be expunged or sealed after 8 years of not recidivism?
So expungement is exceedingly rare in states, but most experts say that it is the very best possible way to treat a criminal record.
So they don't have to hit the box anymore then, right?
If your record is expunged, you don't have to hit the box. That's right.
I mean that's an awful long time, 7 or 8 years, but still there's hope, there's light at the end of the tunnel, because you're talking about unending consequences.
That's right.
For that.
Right.
So would you favor that everywhere?
Well, certainly expungement allows people to move forward. Now, there's all kinds of degrees, right? So law enforcement has asked in most states where they are promoting some type of expungement to have law enforcement still be able to look at people's records for public safety reasons. There are certain contingencies who would want to look at that for very specified jobs. I think, though, that looking at all of the research on the most productive policies, expungement far exceeds either a look-back period or taking the box off of the application. There are some states that are trying to do sort of the in-between. New York right now has a Fair Chance Act that they're trying to pass in the city.
What does that mean?
So that takes the box off the front of the application, and then it has the employer go through the interview process, and you can ask about a criminal record after you've offered someone the job.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, people are trying to find a middle ground on certainly letting employers understand what they need to understand to make safe employment and productive employment decisions, but also to give people who are trying to be employed and to become members of the working public the actual honest chance to do that.
Well, that seems fair to me. I think they have a right to know, perhaps, if they were incarcerated. I don't know if that's always necessary, but the fact is that if they have a box on the front and they have 100 applications, I hire people all the time. You have to find a way to vet these,
right?
And that's an easy way if the box is checked.
Right, and with the numbers as they are, I mean, if 1 in 100 Americans are in jail, 1 in 33 Americans has a criminal record, we're eventually going to run out of people. Right?
I know. That's like, duh, After the break, we got a lot more to talk about. I want to talk about mass incarceration and what the church can be involved in. I want to help the viewers get a better sense of collateral consequences, because we've just talked about voting rights and employment. But I think that there's a few more, right?
There are.
There are. So we're going to be talking about that. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this.
Correcting Bible study lessons is crucial to helping inmates. To partner with CBI in this safe and secure role, please visit us at cbi.fm on the web.
Welcome back to Crossroad Connection. I'm David Scheringa, and I have Heather Garretson here in the studio with me today. And Heather, it's been a delight to talk with you. She's a specialist in has special interest in this whole matter of mass incarceration, in this matter of collateral consequences, what we've been talking about, and what the church maybe can do to get involved. She's been a prosecutor and a defense lawyer. And so sort of everything in one package, I guess.
Right.
Right? But before the break, I do want to clarify something, because we talked about it in the break, that I had said that is my impression that people who have not recidivated in Michigan for 8 years have had their record expunged or sealed or whatever. But then you were saying that that is something that has not yet been extended to all people who have not recidivated for 8 years, but just certain people who have committed certain crimes at this time. Is that more accurate?
That's right. It's a pretty limited field for people who can have their records expunged. But as you mentioned in the break, like, it is definitely a start.
Yeah, we hope that would open the door. I think I probably got a news brief that just said, "Oh, he signed this into law today," and it sounded really good. But it still is good because, for good politics, you need to take incremental steps sometimes. And people, he does this maybe, and they say, "Oh, the sky didn't fall in." Maybe we can do it for others. It reminds me when I was speaking at a Senate briefing on Capitol Hill about the DRA, and Senator Ben Cardin was there, who buys the DRA completely as the Brennan Center has presented it. But then Senator Rand Paul was also there, and I was very happy to see that because then it becomes a bipartisan issue. But his position on it was that he thought that everyone should be able to vote when they get out of prison, except those who have committed serious crimes. Well, I kind of interpreted that as how you can get maybe this through his constituency to at least, open the door for most prisoners, because most prisoners are not there for serious crimes, right?
Yeah, but why aren't you going to let somebody vote after they've done exactly? What's the point of social disenfranchisement forever?
That's that ongoing retribution thing.
But what's the point of that? Really, what's the point? Is the point saying to this person, the government came to a conclusion that this was your appropriate sentence, whether it was the jury or the judge or the prosecutor or a plea agreement? Like, this is what our corporate body decided was appropriate for you.
Right.
You have done it.
Right.
And now you can work and you can pay taxes and you can live in our communities, but you can't be part of our social fabric.
Right. Well, that is exactly. And so what you're saying is that, and what your interest is in that multiple collateral consequences have accumulated, so that we have this ongoing retribution. Now, how many collateral consequences are there to incarceration?
Thousands. In Michigan alone.
Say it again.
Thousands.
Thousands.
Yes.
Of stuff where they're limited here, limited there. Michigan what?
Right. So there's this great database that the ABA put together, the American Bar Association Collateral Consequences, and you can go on there and you can click a state. So you click Michigan.
We'll put it on the screen.
It's great. And you can click Michigan, and then you can click by category, employment, housing, benefits, or you can just click all, and it will just scroll page after page.
Of limitations.
Places you can't work, places you can't live, places, licenses you can't or maybe can't get. There are some automatic disqualifications, and then there's lots of licenses that have good moral character clauses, like a barber, a cosmetologist, and people can consider your criminal record. Now, you're not supposed to consider it as evidence of bad moral character, but certainly it is considered evidence and can be prohibitive in someone getting an occupational license.
Well, at the federal level, the number of states that do not let ex-offenders vote, I have heard the argument that they they made a bad choice in the crime, and so therefore they can't be expected to make the right choice in voting. And I think, well, that would just about disqualify all of us. I think, you know. Tell us more about the consequences, the collateral consequences. What more? What are some other
So in
ones?
Michigan, if you have a misdemeanor,
and any place in the country.
okay, you can't apply for some scholarships. You can't have
Oh, that's right. Some see they took away Pell Grants from people in prison, and we're working on that for a college program. But I found out that even when they get out of prison, some prisoners who committed certain crimes cannot get Pell Grants. So would that be a collateral consequence?
Sure. Or merit scholarships or other benefits. And so if you're going to prevent someone from being eligible for a public benefit, you have to really question what the reason behind that is, but also who that impacts.
Mm-hmm.
If you have someone reentering who has a family that they need to support and they're having a difficult time finding a job, because even though they have paid what society has said is the payment they have to pay for their crime, they can't get a job now. You're punishing their family, their dependents, if they're not eligible automatically because of their crime for certain benefits.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of places where collateral consequences come up, whether it be in housing, benefits, school, employment, voting. Michigan doesn't have a voting. We're not disenfranchisees here. We let people vote after they get out of jail.
We let people vote, but a lot of them don't know it.
Oh, absolutely.
We have worked with a bit Unlock the Vote and stuff like that because they aren't even aware of it, and even the people in the prison don't seem to be aware of it. Okay, so let's talk about these. They have these collateral consequences on top over their heads. What kind of citizen does that make them?
Well, I do a lot of research with returning citizens, and I talk to them a lot about their experience in coming home. And I have been really surprised at how redemptive it is to have society fully embrace them.
Yeah.
For people to be able to volunteer at their kids' school, to vote, to be like an engaged member. Jeremy Travis, who works at, he's in charge of the College of John Jay Criminal Justice College in New York, has written about this whole idea of welcoming people home, this mentality that if people know that they're welcomed back to society, then they will be actual productive members of society.
Sure. Well, that's what it strikes me is that if we treat them like full citizens, they'll act like full citizens. If we treat them like with suspicion, you know, they're going to be on the entitlement fringes of society. Isn't it in society's best selfish interest to have them fully engaged and have full opportunity so they can be productive members of society?
Well, I mean, you're preaching to the choir on that, but I think that even more than society, I think that it's the Christian community's job. I mean, the more I research this and the more I am in secular environments where I'm studying this and talking to people about it, the more I'm surprised that the church is not leading the cause on this.
Let's talk about that.
So you're talking about the social benefit of welcoming someone home, right?
Sure.
And what we can as a society benefit. And certainly that's true. But if we as Christians who don't deserve the grace we've been given, I mean, if we're going to talk about what we deserve, Christians are the first to be in line to say, I'm not getting what I deserve.
We are the poor and needy.
Right? But I'm not getting what I deserve because Christ has taken that from me. And so by grace, I don't get the punishment that I deserve.
He paid it all.
Right? So how are we not leading the charge on grace and mercy?
Right.
You know, when we have been recipients of it, how can we stand by and see this system that lacks it utterly continue?
Well, to me, I'm a pastor, and I think that the church sometimes is being directed by the culture. And we have to be counter-cultural. We have a very vengeful culture. I mean, it's the payback movies that are the blockbusters, and our people are so easily can be drawn into that in this culture.
Well, that's interesting because I do think that the research shows that the policies that drive this kind of punitive environment really are because people just don't know. I mean, people don't know that violent crime and property crime is down. People don't know that over the last 7 years, more people have been released from prison in Michigan and violent and property crime has dropped, right? So these are things that we have to let people understand so they're not bullied by this conversation about being tough on crime and safe in your homes.
Yes. No, exactly. Now, people in churches, I do see this getting on the radar. And I see churches starting to deal with returning citizens and so forth. What bothers me is I feel that often there's not enough training being done. And I'm finding sometimes people are getting into prison ministry and helping returning citizens and with romantic and idealistic notions about how we're going to help this person and they're going to live happily ever after.
Right.
Don't we need to call the church to action, but also have a very stern warning and a good training program? Is that asking too much?
No, and I think that's absolutely right. Your organization does an amazing job of providing volunteers with education. Prison Fellowship does some great stuff. There's a book called by Professor Byron Johnson, More God, Less Crime, and he outlines. So in this area, there's a lot of data that can drive programs that really work. So churches don't need to feel like they have to reinvent the wheel, right?
Right.
They also can go to programs, very accessible programs, where there is education opportunities for their volunteers to understand the best place for their church to work. So, look, there is a myriad of possibilities here.
Right.
There's a huge correlation between education and incarceration.
Oh, yeah.
Right? If you are a black male between the ages of 20 and 34 without a high school diploma,
75% recidivism rates,
1 in 3 chance you're going to jail.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying if you don't have a diploma, you're going to go to jail, but that correlation is strong.
Oh, yeah, it's huge.
So even if you don't have a church that's going to go into a prison, you have a church that may be in a community where tutoring is possible to them, right? Or mentoring a child. There's a great program, the Amachi Mentorship Program, which can be replicated by churches that mentors children whose parents are incarcerated. There's a lot of ways where churches can get training on how to be active in this area.
And what I want to say as we close too is we work with about 1,500 reentry agencies throughout the country where we place our students so that they can get experienced help finding a job and working through these collateral consequences. I think it's very important that churches partner with people who know what they're doing and not try to be an all-purpose reentry ministry on their own. Is that a fair enough warning?
I mean, I think that's true. It's just there's so many aspects of reentry that I don't think you can maybe address them all. But there also there are so many places that do a good job already that you can really tap into some great resources.
Why reinvent the wheel?
Right.
But so we're going to leave the people with the message that the church and, people of faith everywhere need to be leading the way to welcoming these returning citizens, helping them find a way, remembering that we are returning citizens. Yeah. We are the poor and needy that Jesus cared for, and now he gives us the wonderful privilege to join him in his mission to reach out to the poor and the needy. Can we stop right there?
That's perfect.
Thank you so much for being here. What a pleasure to meet you and to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for being with us. I hope you enjoyed the program, and I hope to see you again here next week.